In this country, there is a mountain pass that officially does not exist on the maps of most states in the world, and yet thousands of people cross it every year. Not figuratively, literally. 93% of this country is mountains. That is not a pretty statistic for a tourism brochure. It means that most of the population lives under conditions where logistics, medicine, and state administration still function according to rules the rest of the world left behind 2 centuries ago. There are districts here that an ambulance cannot reach, not because ambulances do not exist, but because the roads are buried under snow for 8 months of the year. Pause on that number. 93%. Stay with me until the end, because in the finale, there is the story of an artifact found in the Tajik mountains in 2009, an object that 15 years later still has no consensus explanation in the academic world. None, not one. Tajikistan, Central Asia. An area of 143,100 square kilometers, roughly the size of Greece or the American state of Illinois. You can drive across the country from west to east in about 8 hours, if the roads are open. If the roads are open. To the north lie Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. To the west and south, Afghanistan and again Uzbekistan. To the east, China, 4 neighbors, no access to the sea. A country completely enclosed by land, and on every side either by mountains or by states with which relations have historically been complicated. The population is about 10 million people, fewer than in Moscow. And yet for much of its recent history, nearly a third of its population has worked abroad, mainly in Russia. In some years, remittances from labor migrants made up as much as half of the country's GDP. One of the highest levels of dependence on outside remittances anywhere on Earth. Its capital is Dushanbe. The name means Monday. The city was named after the weekly market that used to be held here on that day. This is not a metaphor, not a folk legend. The capital of a sovereign state, a member of the United Nations, is named after the weekday of a village bazaar. When Soviet authorities established an administrative center here in 1924, they simply kept the local name already in use. No one imagined that this small settlement would one day become a capital. The official language is Tajik, one of the very few state languages in the world that is a direct descendant of Persian, the language of Omar Khayyam, Rudaki, and Hafez. Not a dialect, not a side branch, a direct heir to one of the greatest literary languages of the medieval world. Rudaki himself, the first great poet of Persian literature, was born on the territory of present-day Tajikistan in the 9th century, when France did not yet exist as a state. The Tajiks are an Iranian people living in a Turkic world. That matters. Most of the peoples of Central Asia are of Turkic origin. Uzbeks, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Turkmen. Tajiks are not. Linguistically and anthropologically, they are closer to Iranians and Afghans than to their immediate neighbors. It creates a cultural situation that has no simple parallel in Europe. And now, the main point. Tajikistan is home to the Pamirs, a mountain system geographers call the knot of the world. This is where 4 of the greatest mountain systems on the planet come together: the Himalayas, the Karakoram, the Hindu Kush, and the Tian Shan. There is no other point on Earth where 4 such systems meet at once. Nowhere. Stop for a second and feel the scale of that fact. 4 of the largest mountain systems on Earth, in one place, in a country that most people could not name a single fact about. The highest point in the country is Ismail Somoni Peak, formerly known as Communism Peak. It rises 7,495 meters above sea level. That is higher than any mountain in Europe, Africa, or the Americas. Higher than Aconcagua in the Andes, the tallest mountain outside Asia after Denali had its classification clarified. And this summit stands in a country of 10 million people. A country many viewers may be hearing about seriously for the first time right now. The Pamirs are called the roof of the world. In Persian, Bami Dunya. The phrase comes from an ancient tradition. It meant not only physical height, but a special position, a place that sees everything while remaining invisible from below. A roof hides, a roof protects. A roof is something people rarely think to look beneath. Today we are going up onto that roof, and we are going to see what is there. 4 places, 4 mysteries, 4 facts that official history explains, but never completely. The first stop is Sarazm, a settlement 5,500 years old with a burial that should not have been there. The second is the Nurek Dam, one of the largest hydraulic engineering structures in the world, with a construction history Soviet archives still have not fully revealed. The third is the Wakhan corridor, a strip of land only a few dozen kilometers wide, created in the space of a few months in 1895, and one that split a single people across 4 different states. And the fourth is the Shakti petroglyphs, rock carvings at an altitude of 3,600 meters, some of which still have not been dated. Let's begin. This is one of the most famous archaeological sites in Central Asia. Sarazm, an ancient settlement in the Zarafshan River Valley, about 15 kilometers west of Panjakent. A UNESCO World Heritage Site since 2010. Tourist brochures describe it briefly as a Bronze Age settlement bearing witness to the early urbanization of the region. Briefly, because if you describe it accurately, questions begin to appear. Most people who have seen photos of the excavations at Sarazm do not know the main thing. They see neat rectangles of foundations, scorched earth, pottery shards. A familiar picture, familiar expectations. Something that looks, at first glance, like dozens of other archaeological sites across Central Asia. But Sarazm is not ordinary, and the longer you look at it, the clearer that becomes. Sarazm was founded around 3500 BCE, 5,500 years ago. To grasp the scale of that, at that moment Egypt was only beginning to form its first major settlements in the Nile Delta. Sumer existed, but writing was still in its infancy. The first pyramid at Giza would not be built for centuries. Stonehenge would come 1,000 years later. And here, in a mountain valley of Central Asia, in a place difficult to reach even today, under harsh, high-altitude conditions, there existed a city. A city with developed metallurgy, with jewelry production, with irrigation. And this is the crucial point, with trade connections stretching from Mesopotamia to India. This is not a hypothesis, it is a documented fact. The Franco-Tajik archaeological expedition, led by Roland Besenval, working alongside Tajik researcher Yusuf Yakubov from the 1970s onward, identified the following in the archaeological layers of Sarazm. Turquoise of Afghan origin, chemically traced to deposits around Nishapur and Badakhshan. Lapis lazuli from the same Badakhshan sources that supplied Egypt and Mesopotamia in the 3rd millennium BCE. Carnelian from India, likely from the region of modern Gujarat. And metal objects manufactured using techniques then primarily associated with Mesopotamia. All of it in one place, at the same time, in 3500 BCE. Pause there. Mesopotamia, India, Afghanistan. One city in a mountain valley in what is now Tajikistan. 5,000 years ago, and now the most important part. In 1976, during the excavation of one of the burials, archaeologists uncovered a grave that did not fit the rest of the site. It contained the skeleton of a woman. The grave goods were extraordinary in both quality and quantity. Finely worked gold ornaments, bronze mirrors, alabaster vessels, Mesopotamian-style stone cylinder seals, and ceramics belonging to at least 3 different cultural traditions. This burial became known as the Princess of Sarazm. The assemblage clearly suggests very high status, so high that researchers searched for comparisons not in Central Asia, but in Mesopotamia and Iran. Burials with seals and richly colored grave goods of this kind are known from Ur, from Susa, and from sites associated with the Jiroft culture, but not from Central Asia. That alone would already be remarkable. A high-status woman in a mountain valley, buried with objects from 3 civilizations, would already be enough to stop us in our tracks. But in 2019, new data changed the interpretation. A research group from the Geochemistry Laboratory of the Institute of Geology of the Tajik Academy of Sciences, working with French specialists, conducted isotopic analysis of tooth enamel from the princess burial. Strontium and oxygen isotopes in enamel reflect the chemical makeup of the water and food a person consumed in childhood. In other words, they preserve a geological fingerprint of where that person grew up. The result was striking. Her isotopic profile does not match the geochemistry of the Zarafshan Valley. She did not grow up here. She came from somewhere else, probably from a region with a different geochemical composition of soil and water. The exact place remains debated. Similar profiles can be found in several regions, from Iran to northern India. A woman of unknown origin, buried with the symbols of power of 3 civilizations, in a mountain valley in Central Asia, 5,000 years ago. Now stop and think. Who was she? Not her name. That is not the real question. What does her presence here mean? A trade alliance? A diplomatic marriage? A migration route? A network of elites moving across Bronze Age Eurasia long before most people imagined such systems existed? There is, of course, a rational explanation, and it is a serious one. Sarazm stood at the intersection of routes that would later become part of the Silk Road world. The Zeravshan Valley is one of the most convenient natural corridors through the mountains of Central Asia. A woman from another region could easily be explained through marriage ties, long-distance exchange, or diplomacy. That explanation is honest, it is logical, but it does not answer everything. If Sarazm was already connected to Mesopotamia, India, and Afghanistan in 3500 BCE, centuries before Babylon, why is it almost absent from the grand narratives of the cradle of civilization? Why are the routes converging here still so often described in academic language as possible or hypothetical? Why is the Princess of Sarazm not a name known far beyond specialist circles? Because a roof hides what lies beneath it. And what exactly lies beneath this one, we still do not know. There is another fact about Sarazm that is mentioned far less often. The settlement was abandoned around 2000 BCE, abruptly, without clear signs of destruction, without obvious traces of conquest, no mass graves, no convincing evidence of fire, no military devastation. The people simply left. Where they went remains unknown. One day the city was there, and then it was not. 600 years before the fall of Troy. The roof remains, but those who first raised it are gone. Now to one of the most famous engineering structures of the Soviet era in Central Asia, the Nurek Dam on the Wakhan River. Until 2018, it was the tallest earth-filled dam in the world, 300 meters high. Roughly the height of the Eiffel Tower, nearly twice the height of one of Stalin's Moscow skyscrapers, 3 kilometers wide at the base. A reservoir holding 10.5 cubic kilometers of water. 10.5 cubic kilometers, that is 10.5 trillion liters. These are the figures you will find in every reference article. But there are details those articles usually leave out. Most people who have seen photographs of the Nurek Dam do not know the main thing. Nurek is not just a dam, it is a project that repeatedly came close to stalling for reasons Soviet documents recorded in the cautious, evasive language of bureaucracy. And it is a site around which one of the largest infrastructure stories in the world is still unfolding, one with consequences that reach far beyond Tajikistan. Let's start at the beginning. Construction of the Nurek hydroelectric station began in 1961. The Soviet Union needed electricity to industrialize Tajikistan. The Wakhan River, one of Central Asia's most powerful rivers in terms of both flow and vertical drop, was ideal for hydropower. But there was a problem. The chosen location lay in one of the most seismically active regions on Earth. The Pamirs and the adjacent mountain systems are a zone of active tectonics. The Indian and Eurasian plates collide here. Earthquakes are not exceptional events in this landscape. They are part of the background condition of life. In 1966, 5 years after construction began, when the dam foundation was already being laid, a magnitude 5.5 earthquake struck the area of the future reservoir. The project had been designed to withstand earthquakes of up to magnitude 8. The design was not revised. The dam entered operation in 1972. Construction was fully completed in 1979. 18 years of work. According to official Soviet figures, several dozen workers died during construction. Full access to the project documentation remained closed until the collapse of the Soviet Union. Some archives remain restricted even now. This is not metaphor, not rumor. It is the reality historians encounter when they work with the record of Soviet industrial projects in the region. Now for what is clearly documented in open sources. In 1985, when the dam was already operating, the Seismological Service of the Academy of Sciences of the Tajik SSR recorded a series of small underground tremors beneath the reservoir. Soviet geophysicists identified them as induced seismicity, a known phenomenon in which the immense weight of stored water alters pressure on tectonic structures below and around a reservoir. Water is heavy. 10 cubic kilometers of water press on rock very differently than an empty valley does. In 1987, a group of Soviet hydrogeologists led by Georgy Medvedev published a study in the Proceedings of the USSR Academy of Sciences documenting more than 1,800 seismic events in the Nurek Reservoir area between 1972 and 1986. Pause on that number. 1,800 seismic events in 14 years. An average of about 130 a year. 130 underground tremors every year in the immediate vicinity of a 300-meter dam. Most of these events were small, too weak to be felt by people. That distinction matters. Induced seismicity around large reservoirs is a studied phenomenon, and in most cases it does not pose a critical threat to the dam itself. But there is a larger context here. In 2005, Tajikistan made the decision to build the Wakhan Dam on the same river, upstream from Nurek. Its planned height is 335 meters. When completed, it will be the tallest dam in the world, taller than Nurek, taller than any hydraulic structure ever built. At full capacity, its reservoir is expected to hold about 13 cubic kilometers of water. 13 cubic kilometers, roughly a quarter more than Nurek. In the same tectonic zone, Wakhan is one of Tajikistan's defining national projects. When the dam is completed and the reservoir filled, the country expects to achieve energy independence and export electricity to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and beyond. That would change the geopolitical balance of the region. Construction of Wakhan actually began back in 1976, during the Soviet era. It was interrupted several times, including after a flood in 1993 damaged part of the unfinished structure. After 2005, work resumed. The first generating unit was launched in 2018. The second followed in 2019. Full capacity will only be reached once the main dam is completed and the reservoir fully filled. This is not history, it is an ongoing process. International reviews, including World Bank assessments carried out between 2012 and 2014, concluded that the project is technically feasible, provided strict conditions are met for seismic monitoring and risk management. That is a serious engineering conclusion. A fair one, but it still leaves one question hanging. Downstream from the Wakhan lie towns and settlements with a combined population of several million people. Farther on, the river joins the Amu Darya and enters Uzbekistan. If a 10 cubic kilometer reservoir at Nurek generated around 130 seismic events a year, what does that suggest for a reservoir of even larger scale in the same active tectonic environment? Tajik engineers know that question. International experts know that question. There is no simple answer available in the open record. The roof holds. For now. And there is one more detail worth adding. Uzbekistan historically opposed the Wakhan project, fearing changes to the flow of the Amu Darya, on which Uzbek agriculture depends. For more than 2 decades, the issue strained relations between the two states. After the death of President Islam Karimov in 2016, relations began to improve, and Tashkent softened its stance. But the deeper issue never disappeared. One dam and the geopolitics of 2 countries. One river and the lives of millions who depend on it. In the mountains, water is never just water. If this video is opening something new for you, subscribe to the channel right now and share it with someone you know. Tajikistan is a country people almost never talk about. But as you can already see, in this case, silence is information in itself. Share this video, and maybe someone you know will add a missing piece to this picture, something even we do not yet know. Now to one of the most striking geopolitical artifacts of the 19th century, the Wakhan Corridor, a narrow strip of territory in northeastern Afghanistan, bordered by Tajikistan to the north and Pakistan to the south, about 350 kilometers long, on average 50 to 65 kilometers wide, in places only about 20. On the map, it looks like a thin tail stretching eastward from Afghanistan toward China. A strange shape, a piece of land that seems to defy the logic of natural borders. Most people who know about the Wakhan corridor know one basic fact. It was created in 1895 as a buffer zone between the British and Russian empires. That is true, but it is not the whole truth. Most people who have seen the map of Wakhan do not know the main thing. Behind that thin strip of land lies a story in which the two greatest empires on Earth came within a step of direct confrontation. A story settled in just a few months, and a story whose consequences are still alive today. In divided families, in mismatched passports, in the 4 different fates of one and the same people. Let us begin with what was known as the Great Game. From the 1830s to 1907, the British and Russian empires waged a quiet but intense struggle for influence in Central Asia. The British advanced north from India. The Russians moved south and east from the steppes and from Turkestan. Between them lay a vast zone, neither side fully controlled, the mountains of the Pamirs, Afghanistan, and parts of Persia. This was the Great Game, no formal war. Instead, spies, cartographers, diplomats, local rulers, and small armed detachments. In 1891, the situation escalated sharply. Colonel Mikhail Ionov and his Russian Cossacks occupied a number of positions in the Pamirs, in territory Britain regarded as lying within its sphere of influence. At the same time, the British officer and explorer Francis Younghusband, later one of the best-known imperial travelers of his age, was detained by the Russian officer Boris Yanov and forcibly escorted out of the disputed zone. This was not some colorful frontier anecdote. It was a diplomatic incident discussed in London and in St. Petersburg. Younghusband later wrote in his memoirs, "The Russian colonel was polite but unyielding. He told me I was on Russian soil. I told him I was not. We both knew the truth lay somewhere between us, and that was precisely the problem. Both men understood the real issue. The border had not actually been drawn. And so, in 1895, in order to draw it and avoid war, the Pamir Boundary Commission was convened, a joint Anglo-Russian effort that in the space of a few months carved up the Pamirs and fixed frontiers that would ultimately divide the region among 4 states. A few months, 4 states, a land where people had lived for thousands of years. 22 years before Woodrow Wilson would speak of the right of peoples to self-determination. 22 years. The result was the Wakhan Corridor, a deliberately preserved strip of Afghan territory left in place so that British and Russian possessions would nowhere touch directly. Afghanistan received Wakhan not because the people living there chose that future, but because it was convenient for 2 empires. But Wakhan was never empty land. The Waki are one of the small peoples of the Pamirs. Their population is estimated at roughly 60 to 70,000 people. They are Ismailis, followers of a branch of Shia Islam historically associated with education, intellectual openness, and the spiritual authority of the Imam, in this case, the Aga Khan. As a result of the 1895 demarcation, the Waki found themselves divided among 4 states: Afghanistan, the Russian Empire, later the Tajik SSR, and then Tajikistan, British India, later Pakistan and China in Xinjiang. 1 people, 4 states. That is not a historical footnote without consequences. It is a living reality. Waki communities on the Tajik side, during the Soviet period, gained access to Soviet-style education, medicine, and social guarantees. Their Afghan relatives in Wakhan remained in a far more isolated traditional world, then endured decades of war. Waki communities in Pakistan developed under a different administrative system and through different cultural contacts. Those in China, under another set of conditions entirely. 4 versions of 1 people, because of a few months of cartographic work in 1895. One of the British officers associated with boundary work in the region, Thomas Holditch, later wrote words close to this. They had drawn lines across the map with a speed that would have been absurd even if they were dividing a garden plot. And yet here they were dealing with mountains many of them had barely seen up close. They drew boundaries through landscapes they did not truly know. Now add 1 more layer. Today the Afghan-Tajik border runs for around 1,300 kilometers. It is one of Tajikistan's longest borders and one of the most difficult to control. After the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan in 2021 and the return of the Taliban, the situation along the border became far more tense. Tajikistan reinforced its military presence there, and several border incidents were reported in 2021 and 2022. The line drawn in 1895 is still burning. The great game is over, but the board remains. And right now, press like on this video. Not because you have to, but because this is a story about people divided by history without ever being asked. A like tells the algorithm that such stories matter. And write in the comments, had you ever heard of the Wakhan, a people who today live in 4 different countries? And check out the other videos on the channel. There are stories there that can rearrange the world map in your head just as completely as this one. Now to one of the most famous rock art sites in Central Asia. The petroglyphs of Shakti in the Murgab district of the Gorno-Badakhshan Autonomous Region. Several thousand images carved into rock surfaces at an altitude of more than 3,600 meters above sea level, 3,600 meters higher than Mont Blanc. Hunters, mountain goats, scenes of pursuit, archers, horsemen, geometric signs. At first glance, it looks like a familiar rock art complex, until you begin to count. Most people who have seen photographs of the Shakti petroglyphs do not know the main thing. The carvings belong to several different chronological groups, and the gap between those dates is already enough to complicate what we think we know about the human occupation of the high Pamirs. But one group of images has not been securely dated at all, 15 years, and still no academic consensus. Let's begin with what is known. Rock carvings in the Pamirs have been known to researchers since the late 19th century. The first scientific descriptions of some of these panels were made by Russian military topographers and ethnographers in the 1880s and 1890s, during the very same era of the Great Game we have just been discussing. Systematic research began in the Soviet period, especially in the 1950s through the 1970s. The Tajik archaeologist Boris Litvinsky, one of the leading scholars of ancient Central Asia, classified the Pamir petroglyphs in his work of the 1960s and 1970s into several chronological groups. In his view, the earliest belonged to the Bronze Age, roughly 2000 to 1000 BCE. Later examples belonged to the early Iron Age and the historical period. That became the working classification in Soviet scholarship. And then, in 2009, something changed. A German Tajik expedition, led by Markus Wildhagen of the Free University of Berlin, carried out detailed photogrammetric recording of several panels in the Shakti area. Photogrammetry makes it possible to build precise 3-dimensional models of a surface and reveal details invisible to the naked eye. During that work, researchers identified a group of images that fit none of the established chronological layers. Technically, they were made differently. Finer pecking lines, different depth, different tool marks. Thematically, they depict figures whose interpretation remains disputed. Some researchers see stylized human figures wearing clothing that recalls late medieval iconography. Others see geometric symbols for which no parallel has yet been found in the rock art of Central Asia. The findings were published in 2012 in a volume titled Pamir Heritage, Materials from the 2009 to 2011 Field Research. And in the section devoted to these images appears a phrase that is unusually blunt for academic writing. Dating and cultural attribution not established. Not tentative, not requiring further study, not established. 3 years after the discovery. And 15 years later, still no consensus. Now, the rational position here is important. Undated rock art is not some sensational anomaly in archaeology. It is a normal working situation. Radiocarbon dating cannot be directly applied to stone. Stylistic dating depends on comparisons, and if no comparisons exist, then the date remains open. Many rock art sites around the world contain images whose chronology remains uncertain. That does not mean unexplainable, it means not yet sufficiently studied. That is a fair and intellectually honest position. But even that does not answer everything. The Shakti petroglyphs are at 3,600 meters above sea level. The Pamirs are among the least densely populated regions on Earth. The amount of time a person can comfortably remain at that altitude without acclimatization is limited. The average annual temperature in the area is around -7 degrees Celsius. Modern transportation infrastructure only appeared here in the Soviet period. So who kept climbing up here? Not once. Repeatedly, judging by the sheer number of images. Why? And what did the signs mean? The ones for which we still have no dictionary. Now back to the detail promised at the beginning. During that same 2009 expedition, while working a few kilometers from the main petroglyph complex, the team made a discovery that Wildhagen describes in his report briefly and with great caution. In a rock fissure, at a depth of about 1.5 meters, they found an object. Metal, small, about 12 centimeters long. Its shape resembled a stylized human figure. Metallographic analysis indicated an alloy of copper, tin and lead, consistent with Central Asian bronzes of the early or Middle Bronze Age, roughly the 2nd or 3rd millennium BCE. But here is the part that does not fit. The object's surface bears traces of secondary engraving, lines cut over the original cast form with a tool. These lines create a pattern that specialists in the Bronze Age of Central Asia were unable to connect to any known iconographic tradition in the region. Not unable to identify precisely, unable to link it to any known tradition. The object is reportedly held in the collections of the National Museum of Antiquities of Tajikistan in Dushanbe. The last published mention of it appears to date from 2012. No later attribution seems to have entered the open academic record. This is not a legend, not internet mythology. It is a detail preserved in an academic publication. The Roof of the World keeps its own records. We simply have not yet learned how to read them. And if you have made it this far, then you already understand that Tajikistan is not just another point on the map of Central Asia. Write in the comments which of the 4 stories struck you most deeply. Sarazm, Nurek, Wakhan, or the petroglyphs. That helps us understand what the next video should be about. Leave a like if you think stories like these deserve to be heard more widely. And subscribe. There are many more places ahead that textbooks barely mention at all. Now let us return to where we began. To the roof. We have spent this time beneath the roof of the world. We passed through a city that traded with Mesopotamia and India before Babylon even existed, and where one day a woman from somewhere unknown was buried with the gold of 3 civilizations. We passed a dam built over 18 years in an active seismic zone, and beside it, another even larger dam now rising. We crossed a corridor created in a few months by 2 empires, a corridor that split one people into 4 forever. We stood before carvings on stone thousands of years old, and among them an object whose meaning remains unread. We did not find answers. That is not a failure of the route. That is the route. Think of how many people stood here before us. A woman from an unknown land, buried at Sarazm with the gold of 3 civilizations 5,000 years ago. A laborer at Nurek in 1965, looking downstream and wondering whether the earth could really hold what they were building. A Wakhan shepherd in 1895, unaware that beyond the next ridge, men were drawing a line that would become a state border. A person climbing to 3,600 meters with a tool in hand, carving a sign into rock, and leaving no key behind. And now, a young person in the 21st century, holding a phone and watching this video. One chain, different ages, one roof. What if we know only half of Tajikistan? What if the archives still unopened change everything we think we know about its past? What other secrets does this roof still hold? The roof of the world has reached you. Across 5,000 years of history. Across mountains that cover 93% of the country. Across archives not yet fully opened. Across images not yet read. It has reached you in the form of questions without answers. And that is not accidental.